The April sun streamed through the lace curtains of the Henderson family home in suburban Cincinnati, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors that Margaret Henderson had spent the morning polishing to perfection. The scent of fresh lilacs from the backyard mingled with the aroma of homemade chicken salad sandwiches and vanilla cupcakes cooling on the kitchen counter. "Mom, the decorations look beautiful," Olivia called from the living room, her voice carrying that particular breathless quality of a woman in her 8th month of pregnancy. At 24, she moved with the careful grace of someone carrying precious cargo, one hand constantly resting on her rounded belly as if protecting the life within. Margaret smiled, adjusting the pale yellow ribbons on the gift table one last time. Yellow and green, neutral colors for a baby whose gender would remain a surprise until birth. "Your sister picked out most of this," she replied, watching as Jessica, 26 and perpetually organized, directed her husband Tom in hanging the "Welcome Baby" banner across the archway. "A little to the left, honey," Jessica instructed, her auburn hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her maternity dress, borrowed from Olivia just 2 years ago for her own baby shower, pressed and spotless. There, perfect. The afternoon light caught the diamond in Olivia's engagement ring as she reached for a glass of sparkling cider, the modest stone catching and throwing tiny rainbows across the cream-colored walls. She'd chosen this house specifically for moments like these, the open floor plan perfect for gatherings, the large windows that filled every room with natural light, the sense of warmth and possibility that seemed built into the very foundations. "Are you nervous?" asked her cousin Emma, settling beside her on the overstuffed sofa with its protective plastic covers. Carefully removed for the occasion, Emma was 22, fresh out of college, her whole life stretching ahead of her like an unmarked page. Olivia's hand moved to her belly in that unconscious gesture that had become second nature. The baby responded with a gentle flutter, as if acknowledging the attention. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly excited. We've been planning for this for so long." Through the kitchen doorway, she could see her fiancé Michael loading ice into a large galvanized tub, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he worked. He'd insisted on helping with the preparations, despite Margaret's protests that baby showers were women's work. At 26, Michael had the steady reliability that had first attracted Olivia to him 3 years ago when they'd met at a friend's barbecue. He was the kind of man who showed up when he said he would, who remembered anniversaries and birthdays without being reminded, who'd proposed with a ring he'd saved for 6 months to afford. "He's a good one," Margaret had told her daughter more than once, and Olivia knew it was true. Michael worked construction, his hands permanently stained with honest dirt, his back already showing the slight stoop that came from years of physical labor. But his eyes lit up whenever he talked about the baby, about the nursery they'd painted together in soft mint green, about teaching their child to ride a bike and throw a baseball. The front door chimed, and voices began to fill the house. Olivia's co-workers from the insurance office where she worked as a claims processor arrived in a cluster, their arms full of wrapped gifts and cheerful chatter about morning sickness and baby names. Mrs. Jen from next door appeared with a casserole dish and stories about her own grandchildren in California. Olivia's best friend from high school, Amanda, rushed in apologetically late from her weekend shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. "I'm so sorry," Amanda gasped, pressing a gift bag into Olivia's hands. 3 admissions came in right at shift change and she stopped mid-sentence, taking in Olivia's appearance with the trained eye of someone who spent her days observing people's physical condition. "You look tired, Liv. Are you getting enough rest?" Olivia laughed, though it sounded a bit forced even to her own ears. "As much as anyone can at 8 months pregnant. This little one loves to dance at 3 in the morning." She patted her belly fondly, but Amanda's concerned expression didn't fade. "Seriously, you've lost weight in your face. Are you eating enough?" "Amanda, you're not at work," Jessica called from across the room where she was arranging gifts on the designated table. No medical consultations at baby showers, it's a rule. But Amanda's comment had planted a seed of unease in the room. Margaret appeared at Olivia's elbow with a plate of sandwiches, her maternal instincts kicking into overdrive. "You should eat something, sweetheart. You barely touched breakfast." The truth was, Olivia had been struggling with more than just the usual pregnancy discomforts. The nausea that should have subsided after the first trimester had lingered, making it difficult to keep food down. The financial stress of preparing for a baby on Michael's construction wages and her modest office salary had been keeping her awake at night, staring at the ceiling and doing mental calculations about daycare costs and medical bills. But this wasn't the time for those worries. Today was about celebration, about community, about the joy of bringing new life into the world. Olivia forced a smile and accepted the plate from her mother, taking a small bite of chicken salad to satisfy the hovering women around her. "Much better," Margaret said, patting her daughter's shoulder. "Now, should we start with games? I bought supplies for baby bingo and that game where you guess the baby food flavors." The afternoon unfolded with the predictable rhythm of such gatherings. Women clustered in groups, sharing pregnancy stories and advice, cooing over tiny clothes and soft blankets. The gift opening ceremony produced the usual suspects: a high chair from Jessica and Tom, a car seat from Margaret and her husband Frank, countless sleepers and onesies in newborn sizes that looked impossibly small. Michael appeared periodically, refilling drinks and making small talk with the husbands who had been recruited for setup duty, but were clearly counting the minutes until they could escape to watch the baseball game on the back patio. He moved through the room with easy confidence, accepting congratulations and backslaps, his hand finding Olivia's shoulder whenever he passed her chair. "You two are going to be wonderful parents," said Mrs. Chen, settling into the chair beside Olivia with a cup of tea balanced carefully in her arthritic hands. "I can see it in how you look at each other. That baby is lucky to have you." Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes, another side effect of pregnancy that still caught her off guard. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That means so much. My husband and we tried for years before our first son came," the older woman continued, her voice soft with memory. "Sometimes the waiting makes you appreciate the gift even more. You understand how precious it is." The words hit Olivia with unexpected force. Precious. Yes, that was exactly what this was. Precious and fragile and more important than anything she'd ever done in her life. The baby kicked then, as if responding to the conversation, and Olivia's hand moved instinctively to the spot. "Active little one," Mrs. Chen observed with a smile. "That's a good sign." As the afternoon wore on, the energy in the room began to shift. The initial excitement of arrivals and gift opening had settled into a comfortable hum of conversation. Women sat in small groups, discussing everything from breastfeeding techniques to the best baby monitors, their voices creating a warm backdrop of female community and shared experience. Olivia found herself in the center of it all, accepting advice and well-wishes with growing emotional overwhelm. This was her village, these women who had shown up to celebrate her transition into motherhood. Her mother, who had driven her to every doctor's appointment when morning sickness made it impossible for her to drive herself. Her sister, who had already started a college fund for the baby despite her own tight budget. Her friends and co-workers and neighbors, all invested in this new life that hadn't even arrived yet. The late afternoon sun had begun to slant through the windows at a different angle when Frank Henderson appeared in the living room doorway, clearing his throat awkwardly. At 58, Olivia's father was a man of few words who preferred his workshop to social gatherings, but he dutifully manned the grill for the male contingent banished to the backyard. "Ladies," he said, his voice carrying easily over the conversation, "I hate to interrupt, but there's someone here to see Olivia." The room fell silent with the peculiar stillness that comes when a group senses a shift in atmosphere. Olivia looked up from the baby blanket she'd been admiring, her heart beginning to race with a premonition she couldn't name. "Who is it, Daddy?" Frank's expression was carefully neutral. but Olivia had known him long enough to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he was trying to control his temper. "It's Ryan," he said simply. The name hit the room like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of recognition and unease. Ryan Mitchell, the baby's father. The man who had walked out of Olivia's life 6 months ago when she told him about the pregnancy, who had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with either her or their child. "What does he want?" Margaret's voice was sharp with protective anger, her hands moving to smooth her apron in the nervous gesture that had marked moments of family crisis for as long as Olivia could remember. Frank's eyes found his daughter's across the room. "He says he needs to talk to you, Livy. Says it's important." The comfortable bubble of the baby shower had burst completely now. Conversations died mid-sentence, and Olivia could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes watching her reaction. Michael appeared beside Frank, his face flushed with heat and anger. "I told him this wasn't the time or place," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "But he won't leave. He's been drinking, Liv. I can smell it on him." Olivia's hand moved protectively to her belly, the baby seeming to sense her distress with a series of strong kicks. This was supposed to be a day of joy and celebration, surrounded by the people who loved and supported her. Ryan's presence felt like a violation of that sacred space, a reminder of complications she'd worked hard to leave behind. "I don't want to see him," she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the silent room. "Please just ask him to leave." He says he won't go until he talks to you," Frank replied, his own anger beginning to show in the set of his shoulders. "I can call the police if you want." "No," Olivia said quickly. The last thing she wanted was to turn her baby shower into a neighborhood spectacle. "No, that would make everything worse." She struggled to rise from her chair, accepting Michael's steadying hand as she got to her feet. The room full of women watched her with a mixture of concern and curiosity, the afternoon celebration forgotten in the face of this unexpected drama. "Maybe I should just go talk to him," Olivia said, trying to inject a note of calm reasonableness into her voice. "Get this over with so we can go back to celebrating." "Absolutely not," Margaret said firmly. "You don't owe that boy anything, Olivia, not after what he put you through." "I'll go with you," Michael said, his protective instincts fully engaged. But before anyone could move, Ryan Mitchell appeared in the living room doorway behind Frank, pushing past Olivia's father with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd been drinking just enough to dull his better judgment. At 25, he still had the lean build and careless good looks that had first attracted Olivia, but months of hard living had added a rough edge to his appearance. His dark hair was longer than she remembered, his clothes wrinkled and smelling of cigarettes and beer. "Jesus, Liv," he said, taking in the scene with bleary eyes. "This is quite a party you've got here." The room went dead silent. Margaret moved protectively toward her daughter, while Michael stepped forward with his fists already clenched. Frank looked like he was seriously reconsidering his position on calling the police. "Ryan, please," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not here, not now." But Ryan was already scanning the room, taking in the gifts and decorations with the expression that shifted from confused to bitter in the space of a heartbeat. His eyes lingered on the carefully arranged presents, the welcome baby banner, the faces of 20 women frozen in shock and disapproval. "All this for a baby that—" he started to say, then stopped himself, swaying slightly on his feet. "That what?" Olivia asked, though some part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Ryan looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the exact instant when his remaining self-control crumbled. Maybe it was the alcohol, or the pain of seeing her surrounded by love and support while he stood alone and unwelcome. Maybe it was simple cruelty, or maybe he genuinely believed he was doing her some kind of favor. Everyone was smiling, Margaret beaming with grandmother's pride, Jessica glowing with sisterly joy, the friends and neighbors and co-workers all united in celebration of new life and new beginnings. Until Ryan said, with the casual brutality of someone who had nothing left to lose, "She's not keeping the baby anyway." Time seemed to crystallize in that moment, like a photograph snapped at the precise instant of impact. 23 faces frozen in various stages of shock, confusion, and dawning. Horror. The afternoon sunlight continued to stream through the windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams, but the warmth had drained from the room as surely as if someone had opened all the doors to winter. Margaret Henderson's hand flew to her chest, her face going pale beneath the careful makeup she'd applied that morning. The plate of cucumber sandwiches she'd been holding crashed to the hardwood floor, china fragments scattering like broken promises across the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift 34 years ago. "What did you just say?" Margaret's voice came out as barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute maternal authority. Ryan swayed slightly, the alcohol in his system making him bold in a way that sobriety never had. His eyes found Olivia's across the room, and for a moment something that might have been regret flickered across his features. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the bitter satisfaction of someone who had just dropped a nuclear bomb and was waiting to see the fallout. "You heard me," he said, his words slightly slurred but unmistakably clear. Ask your precious daughter about the papers she signed 3 weeks ago." Olivia felt the room begin to spin around her, the familiar faces of her friends and family blurring together in a kaleidoscope of confusion and accusation. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, the baby kicking frantically as if sensing the chaos that had suddenly engulfed their world. "Olivia?" Jessica's voice cut through the stunned silence, sharp with disbelief. "Oh, what is he talking about?" All eyes turned to her then, 23 pairs of eyes that had been full of love and celebration just moments before, now searching her face for answers she wasn't ready to give. Olivia opened her mouth to speak, to deny, to explain, but no words came. The weight of their collective gaze pressed down on her like a physical force, stealing her breath and her voice. Michael stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "Liv, tell them this drunk asshole is lying. Tell them—" "I'm not lying," Ryan interrupted, pulling a folded piece of paper from his back pocket with the theatrical flourish of someone who had been planning this moment. "She signed the papers, Mike. Your girlfriend signed away her rights to the baby 3 weeks ago." The paper he held up was official-looking, legal, with the kind of dense text and formal headers that spoke of lawyers and notaries and irrevocable decisions. Even from across the room, Olivia could see her own signature at the bottom, written in the careful script she'd practiced since elementary school. Amanda, her nursing training kicking in, moved toward Olivia with professional concern. "Liv, you need to sit down. Your blood pressure." But Olivia couldn't sit, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at that piece of paper that represented the most difficult decision she'd ever made in her life. The decision she'd agonized over for weeks, losing sleep and appetite, and the ability to pretend that everything was going to be fine. "Is it true?" Margaret's voice broke on the question, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. "Please, Olivia, tell me this isn't true." The silence stretched between them, like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. Olivia looked at her mother, at the woman who had raised her with stories about the joy of motherhood and the blessing of children, who had converted the spare bedroom into a nursery and hand-knitted tiny booties that were waiting upstairs in the dresser drawer. "Mom," Olivia began, her voice barely audible, "I can explain—" But Margaret stepped backward as if she'd been slapped, her face crumpling with the kind of pain that comes from betrayal by someone you trust completely. "Oh God, oh my God, it's true." The room erupted then, voices rising in a cacophony of shock and disbelief. Emma burst into tears, her face buried in her hands. Mrs. Chen sat frozen in her chair, her teacup suspended halfway to her lips. Olivia's co-workers from the insurance office exchanged glances full of uncomfortable recognition. They'd wondered why she'd been so quiet lately, so evasive when they asked about baby preparations. "How could you not tell us?" Jessica's voice rose above the others, sharp with hurt and accusation. "How could you let us throw you a baby shower when you're giving the baby away?" "It's not like that," Olivia said desperately, finally finding her voice. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." Michael's voice was raw with pain, his face flushed red with embarrassment and rage. "Explain how my girlfriend is pregnant with a baby that she's planning to give away, and I'm the last person to know about it." Ryan laughed then, a bitter sound that cut through the chaos like a blade. "She didn't tell you either, did she? Jesus, Liv, I thought you at least had the balls to tell your fiancé." Michael whirled on him, his construction worker's instincts taking over. "You need to get the hell out of here Before you what?" Ryan challenged, swaying dangerously but still defiant. "Before you throw me out of your girlfriend's baby shower for her baby that she's giving away? The baby that isn't even yours?" The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He stopped dead, his face going from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. "What did you just say?" Olivia felt her world collapsing around her in real time. Every secret she'd kept, every lie she'd told herself about being able to manage this situation, every hope she'd harbored that somehow everything would work out, all of it crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Michael," she said, reaching toward him with a trembling hand, "please let me explain." But Michael was staring at Ryan with the expression of a man who had just realized he'd been living in a lie. "The baby isn't mine." Ryan's smile was cruel and satisfied. 9 months ago, Mike. Count backward. Where was your girlfriend 9 months ago? The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. 9 months ago, Olivia and Michael had been broken up for 2 weeks, the result of a fight about commitment and marriage that had seemed insurmountable at the time. 9 months ago, Olivia had been hurting and angry and had made choices that seemed reasonable in the moment, but had led to consequences she was still trying to navigate. Olivia. Margaret's voice was steady now, with the kind of controlled calm that was somehow more frightening than screaming would have been. "I think you need to tell us what's really going on here." The room had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now, expectant, demanding, heavy with the weight of revelation. Olivia looked around at the sea of faces, some angry, some hurt, some simply confused, all waiting for her to explain how their afternoon of celebration had turned into this nightmare of deception and betrayal. She thought about running, about grabbing her purse and keys and disappearing into the late afternoon sunshine, leaving behind the wreckage of relationships and the debris of shattered expectations. But at 8 months pregnant, running wasn't really an option, and besides, where would she go? This was her family, her community, her life. These were the people who had shown up for her, who had brought gifts and good wishes and genuine joy for her future. The people she had lied to for months. "The baby is Ryan's," she said finally, her voice so quiet they had to strain to hear her. "And yes, I signed adoption papers 3 weeks ago." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Margaret sank into the nearest chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Jessica made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Amanda moved closer, her medical training overriding her personal shock. "Why?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you do this? Why would you give away my grandchild?" Olivia's composure finally cracked completely. 8 months of carrying this secret, of living with the weight of an impossible choice, of trying to balance everyone's expectations with her own reality. It all came pouring out in a torrent of tears and broken explanations. "Because I can't afford it," she cried, her hands pressed against her belly as if she could somehow protect the baby from the chaos surrounding them. "Because Ryan left the minute I told him I was pregnant, and I make $28,000 a year, and Michael and I weren't even together when this happened." The truth was raw and ugly, and completely at odds with the pretty yellow and green decorations that still hung cheerfully around the room. The welcome baby banner seemed to mock them all, a cruel reminder of the celebration that had turned into a wake. "You could have come to us," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "We would have helped. We would have figured something out." "With what money, Mom?" Olivia's voice was harsh with months of suppressed desperation. "Dad's been laid off twice this year. Jessica and Tom are drowning in student loans. We're all just barely keeping our heads above water, and a baby needs so much. Diapers and formula, and childcare and medical bills, and so you decided to give it away without telling anyone?" Michael's voice was quiet now, but deadly. "You let me fall in love with the idea of being a father. Let me paint a nursery and buy a crib and plan our whole future around a baby that was never going to be ours?" Olivia turned to him, seeing her own heartbreak reflected in his eyes. "I tried to tell you so many times, but you were so excited, and you kept talking about teaching the baby to play baseball, and it's not your baby to give away." Jessica's voice cut through the explanation like a whip. "It's our niece or nephew. It's Mom and Dad's grandchild. You can't just decide to erase it from our family." "I'm not erasing anything," Olivia protested, though even as she said it, she knew how hollow the words sounded. "The family adopting the baby, they're wonderful people. They have a beautiful house and stable jobs, and they've been trying to have children for years. And we're not wonderful people." Margaret's voice was broken, aged by the space of a conversation. "Your own family isn't good enough for your child." Ryan, who had been watching the destruction he'd caused with the satisfaction of someone settling an old score, chose that moment to twist the knife deeper. "Tell them about the money, Liv. Tell them how much the adoptive family is paying you." The words hit the room like a second bomb. Olivia's face went white, and for a moment she looked like she might faint. Amanda moved closer, ready to catch her if she fell. "Money?" Frank spoke for the first time since announcing Ryan's arrival, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had worked his whole life for every dollar he'd ever earned. "You're selling our grandchild?" "It's not like that," Olivia said desperately, but she could hear how weak her protest sounded. "It's just they're covering my medical expenses and living costs during the pregnancy. It's completely legal. It's not—" "How much?" Michael's voice was flat, emotionless. Olivia couldn't meet his eyes. 15,000. The number fell into the silence like a stone into deep water. $15,000. Enough to pay off her credit cards and put a down payment on a reliable car. Enough to give her breathing room, to start over, to build the kind of stable life that might someday be ready for children. 15,000 pieces of silver. Jesus Christ, Olivia. Frank's voice was hoarse with disappointment. "I thought we raised you better than this." "You did," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. "You raised me to be practical and responsible, and to think about the future. And the future is that I can't take care of this baby the way it deserves to be taken care of. The adoptive parents can give it everything I can't. A stable home, 2 parents, financial security, college savings." "Love," Margaret said quietly. "Can they give it more love than its own family?" Olivia looked around the room at the faces of people who had shown up to celebrate her baby, who had brought gifts and hope and genuine excitement for a new life entering their world. Her mother, who had already started planning birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Her sister, who had offered to babysit whenever needed. Her neighbors and friends and co-workers, all ready to be part of this child's village. "I don't know," she whispered, and it was the most honest thing she'd said all day. Ryan, sensing that his moment of revenge was complete, crumpled the adoption papers back into his pocket. "Well, this has been fun," he said with mock cheer. "But I think I've said what I came to say." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Liv, the adoptive parents are expecting you to sign the final papers next week, in case you forgot." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Wouldn't want to keep them waiting. And then he was gone, leaving behind the wreckage of relationships and the bitter taste of truth finally spoken aloud. The room fell silent again, but it was the silence of a graveyard now, heavy with loss and regret. Olivia stood in the center of it all, her hands pressed against her belly, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Outside, the April afternoon continued its gentle progression toward evening, indifferent to the human drama playing out behind the lace curtains. The lilacs still bloomed in the backyard, the sun still painted golden patterns on the hardwood floors, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. But inside the Henderson family home, surrounded by baby shower decorations and unopened gifts, everything had changed irrevocably. The celebration was over, and the real conversation, the one that would determine the fate of 3 generations of a family, was just beginning. The 20 minutes that followed Ryan's departure moved with the surreal slowness of a dream sequence. Guests began to leave with the uncomfortable shuffle of people who had witnessed something too private and painful for their presence. Co-workers murmured awkward goodbyes, their earlier excitement curdled into embarrassment. Neighbors gathered their purses and casserole dishes with the practiced efficiency of people escaping an emergency. Mrs. Chen was among the last to go, pausing to squeeze Olivia's shoulder with a gentleness that somehow hurt more than anger would have. "Whatever you decide, dear," she said quietly, "make sure it's what you can live with for the rest of your life." Emma hugged her cousin goodbye, with tears in her eyes, whispering, "I don't understand, but I love you," before hurrying out to her car. Amanda lingered longest, her professional instincts warring with her personal feelings. "Liv, I need to ask, have you been taking care of yourself? Eating enough? Taking your vitamins?" She kept her voice low, medical rather than accusatory. "Because stress like this, it's not good for you or the baby." Olivia nodded numbly, though they both knew it was a lie. She'd lost 12 pounds in the past month, could barely keep food down, and spent most nights staring at the ceiling instead of sleeping. But what was the point of admitting that now? When the last guest had gone, the Henderson family found themselves alone in a room that looked like the aftermath of a celebration that had died mid-laugh. Gift bags sat unopened on the coffee table, their cheerful ribbons and tissue paper suddenly obscene in the heavy atmosphere. The welcome baby banner still hung across the archway, its cheerful message now reading like a cruel joke. Frank moved through the room methodically, gathering paper plates and plastic cups with the mechanical precision of someone who needed a task to keep his hands busy. Margaret sat frozen in her chair, staring at the scattered gifts as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Jessica had taken charge of damage control, calling Tom to pick up their children from her in-laws' house and deflecting questions about why the baby shower had ended so abruptly. Michael stood by the window, his back to the room, staring out at the street where the last of the guests' cars were disappearing around the corner. "So," Frank said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "I guess we need to talk." Olivia had sunk into the rocking chair, the antique rocker that had been Margaret's grandmother's, the one where she'd planned to nurse the baby and hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Her hands rested on her belly, feeling the child's movements with a mixture of love and despair that was almost unbearable. "I know you're all angry," she began, but Margaret held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not angry," Margaret said, though her red-rimmed eyes suggested otherwise. I don't know what I am. Hurt. Confused. Disappointed." She paused, searching for words. "I feel like I don't know you at all." The comment hit Olivia like a physical blow. She'd always been Margaret's good daughter, the responsible one who made sensible choices and never caused trouble. Jessica had been the rebellious teenager, the one who stayed out past curfew and dated boys their parents didn't approve of. Olivia had been the straight-A student, the rule follower, the daughter who called home every Sunday and never forgot Mother's Day. "I'm still me, Mom," Olivia said quietly. "Are you?" Margaret's voice cracked. "Because the daughter I know wouldn't lie to her family for months, wouldn't let us plan a baby shower for a baby she's planning to give away, wouldn't—" She stopped, unable to finish the thought. Michael turned from the window, his face haggard with exhaustion and betrayal. "When were you going to tell me, Liv? After the adoption was final? After I'd bought a crib and painted a nursery and told everyone at work that I was going to be a dad? I tried to tell you," Olivia said desperately. "So many times. But every time I started to, you'd get so excited about the baby, talking about names and college funds, and so you decided it was better to let me live in a fantasy." Michael's voice was raw. "To let me fall in love with a child that was never going to be mine. You were so happy, Olivia whispered. I hadn't seen you that happy since we got back together, Michael finished. Since you told me you were pregnant with another man's baby, and I decided to step up anyway. Yeah, I was happy. I was happy because I thought we were building something together. I thought we were going to be a family. The pain in his voice was devastating. Olivia had known this conversation would come eventually, had rehearsed it in her mind 100 times, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of watching the man she loved crumble under the weight of her deception. Frank sat down heavily in his recliner, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. Help me understand this, Livy. Help me understand how we got here. Olivia took a shaky breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been churning in chaos for months. After Michael and I broke up last summer, I was lost. I went out with some friends from work and Ryan was there and She stopped, the details too private and painful to share with her father. We don't need the specifics, Frank said gently. Go on. It was one night. One stupid, meaningless night when I was hurt and angry and not thinking clearly. Olivia's voice was barely audible. And then Michael and I got back together and everything was perfect again. And I hoped that nothing would come of it. But something did come of it, Jessica said quietly. She'd finished her phone call and was sitting on the arm of Margaret's chair, her earlier anger replaced by something that looked like grief. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew the timing was wrong for it to be Michael's. Olivia's hands moved restlessly over her belly. I took 3 tests, went to the doctor, counted and recounted the dates. There was no doubt. So you told Ryan, Michael said. I told Ryan. Olivia's voice was bitter with memory. He laughed at first, actually laughed, said it wasn't his problem and that I should take care of it if I knew what was good for me. The room went quiet, absorbing the cruelty of that response. When I told him I was keeping the baby, he got angry, said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he had plans that didn't include child support payments or dirty diapers. He told me I was on my own. Margaret made a sound of disgust. What a charming young man. So I was on my own, Olivia continued. Single, pregnant, making barely enough to cover my own expenses, let alone a baby's. I applied for every form of assistance I could find, looked into childcare options, tried to figure out how to make it work. But the numbers, they just didn't add up. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through screenshots she'd taken of budget calculations and childcare costs. Daycare for an infant is $1,200 a month. That's more than my rent. Even if I qualified for assistance, there's a waiting list 2 years long. I looked into working from home, into night shifts so I could watch the baby during the day and work while it slept. But that's not sustainable, Amanda said softly. Not long term. You'd burn out in months. Exactly. Olivia's voice was thick with unshed tears. And then Michael and I got back together, and suddenly everything seemed possible again. He was so excited about the baby, so ready to step up and be a father. He started talking about marriage and houses with white picket fences and you didn't tell him the truth, Michael said flatly. I was going to. Olivia looked at him pleadingly. I swear I was going to tell you. But you were so happy, and things between us were so good, and I kept thinking maybe it didn't matter whose baby it was biologically. Maybe we could just be a family. But it does matter, Frank said quietly. Not because of blood or DNA, but because relationships have to be built on honesty, and you haven't been honest with any of us. Olivia nodded miserably. I know that now. But at the time I was so scared of losing you all. I was scared that if I told the truth, Michael would leave, and you and Mom would be disappointed in me, and I'd end up completely alone. So, when did the adoption idea come up? Jessica asked. About 2 months ago. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. I was at the doctor's office for a checkup, and there was a bulletin board with adoption agency flyers. I took one, thinking maybe I'd just look at it, just see what options were out there. She remembered that day with painful clarity, sitting in her car in the parking lot, staring at the glossy brochure with its smiling couples and promises of loving homes for precious babies. She'd thrown it in the trash twice before finally calling the number. The agency connected me with the Williamses, David and Sarah Williams. They've been married for 8 years, trying to have children for 6. They have a house in a good school district, stable jobs, a college fund already started for a baby they don't even have yet. "And they offered you money," Michael said, his tone carefully neutral. "Not at first." Olivia was defensive now. At first it was just about finding a good home for the baby, but then they offered to cover my medical expenses, and when they found out I was struggling financially, they offered to help with living expenses too. "It's not about the money, not really. It's about $15,000, Frank said. "That's a lot of money for someone making $28,000 a year." "It would change everything for me," Olivia admitted. "I could pay off my credit cards, get a reliable car, maybe even go back to school. I could build the kind of life that might be ready for children someday." "By giving away the child you already have," Margaret said, her voice heavy with judgment. "By giving this baby a chance at the kind of life I can't provide." Olivia's voice rose with frustration. "Don't you understand? I love this baby. I love it so much it's tearing me apart. But love isn't enough. Love doesn't pay for formula or daycare or medical bills. Love doesn't guarantee college tuition or a safe neighborhood or 2 parents who can take turns getting up for midnight feedings." "But we could help," Jessica said. "Maybe not with everything, but with what?" Olivia's voice was sharp with months of suppressed desperation. "Tom just finished his residency and you're drowning in student loans. Mum and Dad are barely keeping the house. Michael works construction and gets laid off every winter. What help could any of us actually provide?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the financial realities that middle-class families rarely discussed openly. They were all getting by, all managing their own bills and obligations, but none of them had the kind of resources that raising a child really required. "There are other options," Amanda said carefully. "Programs, assistance." "I looked into everything," Olivia said. "Government assistance has income requirements that I'm just over the limit for, but not by enough to actually matter. Church programs are for emergency help, not ongoing support. Family assistance programs have waiting lists years long. I spent weeks researching every possible option, and none of them added up to a real solution." Michael walked over to the window again, his shoulders tense with emotion. "So you decided to handle it all by yourself, make the biggest decision of your life without talking to any of us?" "Because I knew you'd all try to talk me out of it," Olivia said quietly. "Because I knew you'd all have opinions and suggestions and emotional reactions that would make it impossible for me to think clearly. And thinking clearly led you to sign adoption papers without telling your fiancé." Michael's voice was bitter. "Thinking clearly led me to consider what's best for this baby," Olivia shot back. "Which might not be growing up poor with a single mother who works 2 jobs and still can't afford decent childcare." "Single mother?" Margaret's voice was sharp. "What about Michael?" Olivia looked at Michael's rigid back, at the set of his shoulders that spoke of a man barely holding himself together. "Michael doesn't deserve to be trapped in a relationship because I got pregnant with another man's baby. He deserves to find someone who can give him children of his own, someone who doesn't come with this kind of baggage." Michael spun around, his face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare make this decision for me. Don't you dare decide what I deserve or don't deserve." "I'm trying to do the right thing," Olivia said desperately. "The right thing would have been honesty from the beginning," Michael replied. "The right thing would have been letting me make my own choices with full information instead of manipulating me with lies and half-truths." "I never meant to manipulate anyone," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face now. "I was just trying to handle an impossible situation the best way I knew how." Frank leaned forward in his chair, his expression grave. "Livy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Do you want to keep this baby?" The question cut through all the practical considerations and financial calculations straight to the heart of the matter. Olivia's hands moved to her belly, feeling the child's movements beneath her fingers. "Yes," she whispered. "More than anything, I dream about holding this baby, about watching it take first steps and say first words. I've already imagined birthday parties and Christmas mornings and teaching it to ride a bike. I want this baby so much it's like a physical ache. Then we'll figure out a way to make it work, Margaret said firmly, her maternal instincts overriding her hurt and disappointment. Families figure things out. That's what families do. But how? Olivia's voice was broken. How do we figure out daycare that costs more than my rent? How do we figure out health insurance that actually covers pediatric care? How do we figure out college savings when we're all living paycheck to paycheck? The same way parents have been figuring it out for generations, Frank said, one day at a time, one problem at a time, with love and determination and the support of people who care about you. And what about Michael? Olivia looked at her fiancé with desperate hope. What about the fact that this isn't his biological child? Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the darkening sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I don't know, Liv. I honestly don't know. A week ago, I thought I was going to be a father to our child. Today, I find out that you're pregnant with another man's baby, and you've been lying to me for months. I don't know what to think about any of it. But you still love me? Olivia's voice was small, hopeful. I don't know that either, Michael said quietly, and the words hit Olivia like a physical blow. The room fell silent again, the weight of unresolved emotions pressing down on all of them like a heavy blanket. Outside, the April evening was settling into dusk, and somewhere in the distance a lawn mower was running, the sound ordinary and comforting in its familiarity. When are you supposed to sign the final papers? Jessica asked eventually. Next week, Olivia said. Friday afternoon at the lawyer's office. That's 6 days, Margaret calculated. 6 days to figure out if there's another way. Mom, I've been trying to figure out another way for months, Olivia said wearily. I've run the numbers 100 times. I've looked into every program, every option, every possible solution. The adoption isn't a decision I made lightly. But it's not a decision you have to make alone, Frank said. You're part of a family, Livy. You're part of a community. Maybe the solution isn't something you can figure out by yourself. What are you suggesting? Olivia asked. Frank looked around the room at his wife and daughters, at the young man who had been planning to marry his daughter and raise her child. I'm suggesting we spend the next 6 days really talking, really looking at all the options, really figuring out if there's a way to make this work that doesn't involve giving away our grandchild. And if there isn't, Olivia asked, if we spend 6 days talking and we still can't figure out a realistic solution, then we support whatever decision you make, Margaret said, though the words clearly cost her. But we don't give up without trying. We don't let fear and pride and financial stress make this decision for us. Michael turned from the window, his face drawn with exhaustion. I need some time to think about all this. I need some space to figure out what I'm feeling and what I want. Olivia's heart clenched with fear. Are you leaving me? I don't know, Michael said honestly. I love you, Liv. I've loved you since the day we met. But I don't know if love is enough to get past this level of deception. I don't know if I can trust you again. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Olivia had known this moment might come, had dreaded it for months, but hearing it spoken aloud was somehow worse than she'd imagined. So, what happens now? She asked quietly. Now we all go home and think, Frank said. We all take some time to absorb what we've learned today and figure out what we want to do about it. And then we come back together and have the conversations we should have been having all along. Jessica stood up, smoothing her dress with hands that weren't quite steady. I should go pick up the kids. Tom's going to want to know what happened here. What are you going to tell him? Olivia asked. The truth, Jessica said simply. Something we all should have been doing from the beginning. One by one, they began to disperse. Jessica gathered her purse and keys, kissing her mother's cheek and squeezing Olivia's shoulder in a gesture that was more resigned than comforting. Frank started collecting the remaining party debris, his movements mechanical and tired. Michael paused at the front door, looking back at Olivia with an expression she couldn't read. I'll call you, he said, when I've had time to think. And then he was gone, leaving Olivia alone with her parents in a living room that still bore the cheerful decorations of a celebration that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Margaret finally stood up, moving with the careful precision of someone whose world had shifted fundamentally in the space of an afternoon. "I think I need to lie down," she said. "This has been a lot to process." She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at her daughter. "Olivia, I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what you decide, you're still my daughter. I'm hurt and disappointed and confused, but I love you. That doesn't change." Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "But I also want you to know that if you go through with this adoption, it will change things between us. I can't pretend it won't. I can't pretend that watching you give away my grandchild won't break something in me that might never heal." The words were spoken quietly, without anger or accusation, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. Margaret climbed the stairs slowly, each step seeming to age her, and Olivia was left alone with her father in the wreckage of what had once been a perfectly planned baby shower. Frank finished collecting the last of the paper plates, then sat down heavily beside his daughter. For a long moment they sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Daddy," Olivia said finally, "what am I going to do?" Frank looked at his daughter, really looked at her, taking in the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame, the tremor in her hands that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly, "but I know you don't have to figure it out alone. And I know that whatever you decide, we'll find a way to live with it." He stood up, stretching his back with a grunt that reminded Olivia that her parents were getting older, that the easy certainties of childhood were long gone. "Why don't you stay here tonight?" he suggested. "Your old room is still set up. You shouldn't be alone right now." Olivia nodded gratefully, too emotionally exhausted to face the prospect of going home to an empty house. As Frank headed upstairs, she remained in the rocking chair, her hands moving in slow circles over her belly. The baby was active tonight, responding to the stress and emotional turmoil with a series of kicks and movements that were both comforting and heartbreaking. In 6 days, she would either be preparing to become a mother or preparing to say goodbye to the child she'd carried for 9 months. Either way, her life was about to change irrevocably. The only question now was whether she'd have the courage to choose love over fear, family over financial security, hope over practical certainty. Outside, the last light of day faded into darkness, and Olivia Henderson sat in her childhood home, rocking gently in her great-grandmother's chair, feeling her baby move beneath her heart and wondering what tomorrow would bring. The next 5 days passed in a blur of difficult conversations, sleepless nights, and emotional revelations that seemed to peel away layers of pretense and fear like an onion being stripped to its core. Tuesday brought a long, painful phone call with the Williams family, during which Olivia tried to explain that she was reconsidering the adoption without being able to promise them anything definitive. Their disappointment was palpable, their confusion understandable, and their pain a weight that added to Olivia's already crushing burden of guilt. Wednesday brought a visit from Amanda, who arrived with prenatal vitamins and the kind of practical medical advice that only a nurse could provide. She checked Olivia's blood pressure, monitored the baby's movements, and delivered a gentle but firm lecture about the importance of self-care during the final weeks of pregnancy. "Whatever you decide about the adoption," Amanda said, "this baby needs you healthy for the next few weeks. You can't make clear decisions when you're running on empty." Thursday brought an unexpected visitor. Ryan's mother, Patricia Mitchell, a woman Olivia had met only once before, at a barbecue that now seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. Patricia was soft-spoken and kind, with the same dark eyes as her son, but none of his bitter edge. "I heard about what happened at your baby shower," Patricia said, settling into the living room chair that Olivia offered her. "I want to apologize for my son's behavior. That was cruel and unnecessary, regardless of whatever issues you two have between you." Olivia was surprised by the visit, touched by the older woman's kindness. "It's not your fault, Mrs. Mitchell. Ryan made his own choices." "Yes, he did, and they were poor choices." Patricia's voice was firm. "But I want you to know that if you decide to keep this baby, you won't be as alone as you think. I've been wanting to be a grandmother for years, and I'm not about to let my son's immaturity rob me of that opportunity." The offer was unexpected and genuinely moving, opening up possibilities that Olivia hadn't considered. But it also complicated things further, adding another layer of relationships and expectations to an already complex situation. Friday morning arrived grey and drizzly, the kind of weather that seemed to mirror Olivia's emotional state. She had an appointment at the lawyer's office at 2 p.m. to sign the final adoption papers, or not to sign them. The choice was hers, and the deadline was approaching with the inexorable certainty of a freight train. Michael had called twice during the week, brief conversations that danced around the larger issues without really addressing them. He was staying at his brother's house, taking time to think, processing the revelation that the future he'd been planning had been built on a foundation of lies. Their relationship hung in limbo, neither broken nor repaired, waiting for resolution that seemed impossibly distant. At 11 a.m., Olivia sat in her parents' kitchen, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold while she tried to summon the appetite for the toast her mother had made. Margaret moved around the kitchen with nervous energy, cleaning surfaces that were already spotless, rearranging items that didn't need rearranging. "You don't have to decide today," Margaret said for the third time that morning. "You could ask for more time." "I've already asked for more time twice," Olivia replied. "The Williamses have been patient, but they have a right to know. They're planning their whole future around this baby." "And what about us?" Margaret's voice carried a note of desperation. "What about our plans? What about the future we've been imagining?" Olivia looked at her mother, seeing the hope and fear warring in her expression. "Mom, I need you to understand something. If I keep this baby, it's not going to be the fairy tale you're imagining. It's going to be hard, really hard. I'm going to need help with everything. Childcare, money, emotional support. My entire life is going to revolve around making ends meet and trying to be a good mother with no experience and no partner." "But you won't be alone," Margaret said firmly. "We'll figure it out together." "Will we?" Olivia asked quietly. "Will we really? Or will you help for a few months until the reality of what it actually costs sets in, and then gradually pull back because you have your own lives to live?" The question was harsh but necessary, cutting through sentiment to practical reality. Margaret's face fell slightly, the truth of the question hitting home. They were all good people with good intentions, but good intentions didn't pay for daycare or cover pediatric medical bills. At noon, Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his work clothes from the part-time maintenance job he'd taken to supplement his unemployment benefits. "Livy, there's someone here to see you." Olivia's heart jumped, hoping it might be Michael. But when she looked toward the front door, she saw David and Sarah Williams standing on the porch. They looked exactly as she remembered them from their meetings at the adoption agency. Well-dressed, successful, radiating the kind of stability that came from good jobs and careful financial planning. "They asked if they could talk to you before the appointment this afternoon," Frank explained, his expression carefully neutral. Olivia's stomach clenched with anxiety. This was the last thing she needed right now, when her emotions were already raw and her decision still uncertain. But she nodded, knowing she owed them at least this much. Margaret disappeared upstairs with diplomatic discretion, leaving Olivia alone with the couple who had been planning to become her baby's parents. They sat on the edge of the sofa, their hands clasped together, their expressions a mixture of hope and carefully controlled desperation. "We're sorry to bother you," Sarah Williams said, her voice soft and cultured. "We know this is a difficult time, but we wanted to talk to you before this afternoon, to make sure you know how much this means to us." David Williams was a tall man with kind eyes and prematurely grey hair, the kind of person who radiated trustworthiness and competence. "We don't want to pressure you," he said, "but we want you to know that our love for this baby isn't conditional on biology. We've been preparing our hearts and our home for this child for months." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo album. "We brought some pictures," she said hesitantly, "of the nursery, of our families, of the life we're hoping to share with your baby." Olivia took the album with trembling hands, flipping through pages that showed a beautiful nursery decorated in soft yellows and greens, family gatherings with smiling relatives, a house with a large backyard, and a swing set waiting for children to play on it. It was everything she'd imagined when she first made the decision to pursue adoption: love, stability, resources, opportunity. "We understand you're having second thoughts," David said gently. "That's natural, and we respect whatever decision you make. But we want you to know that this baby would be wanted and loved and cherished every single day of its life. We've been trying to have children for 6 years," Sarah added, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been through fertility treatments, miscarriages, disappointments that broke our hearts over and over again. When we met you, when you chose us, it felt like a miracle." Olivia felt tears pricking at her eyes. These were good people, people who deserved to be parents, people who had the resources and stability to give a child everything it needed. But they were also strangers, people who would take her baby to a different state, a different life, a different world entirely. "I know you'd be wonderful parents," Olivia said quietly. "That was never the question. The question is whether I can live with giving away my child, regardless of how wonderful its new parents might be." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We've thought about that, about how hard this must be for you, and we want you to know that we're open to staying in touch, to letting you be part of the baby's life, in whatever way feels comfortable for everyone." "An open adoption," David explained. "Letters, pictures, visits maybe. We don't want to erase you from this child's life. We want to honor the sacrifice you're making." The offer was generous, more than many adoptive families were willing to provide. But it also seemed somehow worse to Olivia, the prospect of watching her child grow up in someone else's family, of being a peripheral figure in the life of the person who should be the center of her world. "I need to think about it," Olivia said, closing the photo album and handing it back to Sarah. "I need a little more time." They left, disappointed but gracious, reminding her that they would be at the lawyer's office at 2 p.m., hoping she would come but understanding if she couldn't go through with it. After they were gone, Olivia sat alone in the living room, feeling the weight of multiple families' futures pressing down on her shoulders. At 1 p.m. her phone rang. It was Michael. "I know you have to make a decision today," he said without preamble, "and I know I haven't been fair to you this week, disappearing when you needed me most." "Michael," Olivia began, but he cut her off. "Let me finish. I've been angry and hurt and confused, and I've been thinking only about how your lies affected me. But I've had time to think about it from your perspective too, and I'm starting to understand why you made the choices you did." Olivia's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, not just the version of you that I thought I knew, but the real you, the you that makes impossible choices in impossible situations, the you that sacrifices her own happiness to try to do what's right for everyone else." Olivia was crying now, the relief of hearing his voice overwhelming. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I'm sorry I lied to you. Sorry I let you believe something that wasn't true. I know you are. And I'm sorry I left you to handle this alone this week." Michael's voice was steady, determined. "But I'm not leaving anymore. Whatever you decide about this baby, we'll face it together. Even if the baby isn't yours biologically, families aren't always about biology, Liv. They're about choice and commitment and love. If you decide to keep this baby, then it becomes our baby. Not because of genetics, but because we choose to be a family." The words were everything Olivia had hoped to hear, but hadn't dared to expect. "Are you sure? Are you really sure you can handle this?" "I'm sure I love you," Michael said. "And I'm sure I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if we'd fought for this family instead of giving up on it." At 1:30, Olivia called the adoption agency to let them know she wouldn't be coming to the appointment. The conversation was difficult, full of disappointed sighs and questions about whether she was certain, whether she understood the finality of her decision. "We'll need to let the Williams family know," the counselor said. "They're going to be devastated." "I know," Olivia said, her heart breaking for the couple who had been so kind, so hopeful. "I know this hurts them and I'm sorry, but I can't give away my child. I just can't." Dream. At 2 p.m., instead of signing adoption papers, Olivia was sitting in her parents' living room with Michael, Jessica, Tom, and her parents, having the conversation they should have had months ago. They talked about budgets and childcare, about support systems and shared responsibilities. They talked about the realities of raising a child in a family where everyone was struggling financially but rich in love and determination. "It's not going to be easy," Frank said honestly. "We're all going to have to make sacrifices, all going to have to adjust our expectations. But it's possible," Margaret added, her voice firm with maternal resolve. "Families have been making it work with less than we have for generations." Jessica pulled out a notebook and started making lists, childcare schedules, budget calculations, resource sharing plans. Tom offered to help with medical expenses through his hospital's employee assistance program. Frank and Margaret offered their time and their home for childcare support. "We'll figure it out as we go," Michael said, his hand finding Olivia's and squeezing tight. "One day at a time, one challenge at a time." 2 months later, Olivia gave birth to Emma Rose Henderson, named for her cousin and for the hope that bloomed even in difficult circumstances. The delivery was complicated, requiring an emergency C-section that left Olivia recovering for weeks. But the baby was healthy and beautiful and perfect in every way that mattered. Michael was there for the birth, holding Olivia's hand through the contractions and tears, cutting the umbilical cord with hands that shook with emotion. When the doctor placed Emma in Olivia's arms for the first time, he leaned down and whispered, "She's ours, Liv. She's really ours." The first year was everything they'd feared and more. Sleepless nights, financial stress, the constant juggling of work schedules and childcare arrangements. Olivia went back to work when Emma was 8 weeks old, leaving her daughter with Margaret during the day and picking her up exhausted and guilty every evening. Money was tight, tighter than tight. They clipped coupons and bought generic brands and shopped at thrift stores for baby clothes. Michael picked up extra construction jobs on weekends, and Olivia worked overtime whenever it was available. There were moments when the stress felt overwhelming, when the exhaustion and financial pressure seemed unbearable. But there were also moments of pure joy that made all the struggle worthwhile. Emma's first smile, directed at Michael as he changed her diaper at 3 a.m. Her first laugh, bubbling up from her chest as Margaret played peekaboo. Her first steps, taken in the living room where the baby shower had once been, with her whole family cheering her on. Ryan made sporadic appearances in Emma's life, inconsistent and unpredictable, but gradually warming to his role as father. He and Olivia worked out a custody arrangement that gave him supervised visits twice a month, usually at his mother's house, with Patricia serving as a stabilizing influence. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional, and Emma seemed to benefit from having another adult in her life who loved her unconditionally. The Williamses sent a card when they heard about Emma's birth, a gracious note wishing the family well and expressing their hope that Olivia had found peace with her decision. They included a picture of themselves with a newborn son they'd adopted 6 months later, their faces radiant with the joy of finally becoming parents. On Emma's first birthday, the Henderson family gathered in the same living room where the baby shower had taken place 13 months earlier. The decorations this time were bright primary colors instead of soft pastels, and the guest of honor was a chubby, happy baby who clapped her hands and squealed with delight at all the attention. "Hard to believe it's only been a year," Jessica said, watching Emma destroy a piece of birthday cake with single-minded determination. "Feels like a lifetime," Olivia agreed, exhausted but happy. She looked around the room at her family, her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, Michael bouncing Emma on his knee, Amanda and her new boyfriend, even Mrs. Chen from next door with a hand-knitted sweater for the birthday girl. "Any regrets?" Margaret asked quietly, settling beside her daughter on the sofa. Olivia considered the question seriously. The past year had been the hardest of her life, full of challenges she couldn't have imagined and sacrifices she hadn't expected to make. But as she watched Michael teach Emma to clap along with the happy birthday song, as she saw the joy on her parents' faces as they watched their granddaughter explore the world with fearless curiosity, she knew her answer. "No," she said simply. "No regrets." And that evening, after the guests had gone home and Emma was finally asleep in her crib, Olivia and Michael sat on the front porch of their small rental house, sharing a beer and listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling into night. "You know what I realized today?" Michael said, his arm around Olivia's shoulders. "What's that? A year ago, I thought I knew what I wanted. A house with a white picket fence, a biological child, a fairy tale ending where everything worked out perfectly." He paused, taking a sip of his beer. "But this is better. This is real. This is hard and messy and complicated, but it's ours." Olivia leaned into his warmth, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. "Even with all the struggle? Even with the money problems and the sleepless nights and the constant stress?" "Especially with all that," Michael said firmly. "Because that's what makes it real. That's what makes it worth fighting for." Inside the house, Emma stirred in her sleep, making the soft baby sounds that had become the soundtrack of their lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, bills to pay, schedules to coordinate, the endless dance of working parenthood. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged. Sometimes the most important choices weren't between right and wrong, Olivia reflected, but between fear and love, between security and hope, between the life that seemed practical and the life that felt true. She'd chosen love and hope and truth, and while the path hadn't been easy, it had led her to exactly where she needed to be. The baby shower that had ended in devastation had actually been the beginning of something beautiful. A family forged not by genetics or convenience, but by choice and commitment, and the daily decision to show up for each other, no matter how hard things got. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.